at places about the springs which would, I know, have never been explored save for my presence. "It's what John Hennessy was saying, that he was hard set to get his horse past Clowin Cross, the way the blood was thrown about the road," resumed Peter. "Sure they were fighting like wasps in it half the night." "Who were fighting?" "Oh, I couldn't say indeed, sir. Some of them low rakish lads from the town, I suppose," replied Peter, with virtuous respectability. When Peter Cadogan was quietly and intelligently candid, to pursue an inquiry was seldom of much avail. Next day in Skibourne I met little Murray, the district inspector, very alert and smart in his rifle green uniform, going forth to collect evidence about the fight. He told me that the police were pretty certain that one of the Sons of Liberty, named Foley, had been murdered, but as usual the difficulty was to get anyone to give information. All that was known was that he was gone, and that his wife had identified his cap, which had been found drenched with blood by the roadside. Murray gave it as his opinion that the whole business had arisen out of the row over the disputed race, and that there must have been a dozen people looking on when the murder was done; but so far no evidence was forthcoming, and after a day and a night of search the police had not been able to find the body. "No," said Flurry Knox, who had joined us. "And if it was any of those mountainy men did away with him, you might scrape Ireland with a small tooth comb, and you'll not get him." That evening I smoked an after dinner cigarette, out of doors in the mild starlight, strolling about the rudimentary paths of what would, I hoped, some day be Philippa's garden. The bats came stooping in at the red end of my cigarette, and from the covert behind the house I heard once or twice the delicate bark of a fox. Civilization seemed 1,000 miles off, as far away as the falling star that had just drawn a line of pale fire halfway down the northern sky. I had been nearly a year at Shrewlane House by myself now, and the time seemed very long to me. It was slow work putting by money, even under the austerities of Mrs. Cadogan's regime; and though I had warned Philippa I meant to marry her after Christmas, there were moments, and this was one of them, when it seemed an idle threat. "Peter!" the strident voice of Mrs. Cadogan intruded upon my meditations. "Go tell the Major his calf is waiting on him." I went gloomily into the house, and with a resignation born of adversity swallowed the mixture of chicory and licorice which my housekeeper possessed the secret of distilling from the best and most expensive coffee. My theory about it was that it added to the illusion that I had dined, and moreover that it kept me awake, and I generally had a good deal of writing to do after dinner. Having swallowed it, I went downstairs and out past the kitchen regions to my office, a hideous whitewashed room in which I interviewed policemen and took affidavits and did most of my official writing. It had a door that opened into the yard, and a window that looked out in the other direction among lanky laurels and scrubby hollies, where lay the cat's main thoroughfare from the scullery window to the rabbit holes in the wood. I had a good deal of work to do, and the time passed quickly. It was Friday night, and from the kitchen at the end of the passage came the gabbling murmur, in two alternate keys, that I had learnt to recognise as the recital of a litany by my housekeeper and her nephew Peter. This performance was followed by some of those dreary and heart-rending yawns that are, I think, peculiar to Irish kitchens. Then such of the cats as had returned from the chase were loudly shepherded into the back scullery, the kitchen door shut with a slam, and my retainers retired to repose. It was nearly half an hour afterwards when I finished the notes I had been making on an adjourned case of stroke hauling salmon in the Lonan River. I leant back in my chair and lighted a cigarette preparatory to turning in. My thoughts had again wandered on a sentimental journey across the Irish Channel, when I heard a slight stir of some kind outside the open window. In the wilds of Ireland no one troubles themselves about burglars. More cats, I thought. I must shut the window before I go to bed. Almost immediately there followed a faint tap on the window, and then a voice said in a hoarse and hurried whisper: "Them that wants Jim Foley. Let 'em look in the river." If I had kept my head, I should have sat still and encouraged a further confidence; but unfortunately I acted on the impulse of the natural man, and was at the window in a jump, knocking down my chair and making noise enough to scare a far less shy bird than an Irish informer. Of course there was no one there. I listened with every nerve as taut as a violin string. It was quite dark. There was just breeze enough to make a rustling in the evergreens, so that a man might brush through them without being heard. And while I debated on a plan of action, there came from beyond the shrubbery the jar and twang of a loose strand of wire in a paling by the wood. My informant, whoever he might be, had vanished into the darkness from which he had come as irrecoverably as had the falling star that had written its brief message across the sky and gone out again into infinity. I got up very early the next morning and drove into Skibourne to see Murray and offer him my mysterious information for what it was worth. Personally, I didn't think it worth much, and was disposed to regard it as a red herring drawn across the trail. Murray, however, was not in a mood to despise anything that had a suggestion to make, having been out till 9 o'clock the night before without having been able to find any clue to the hiding place of James Foley.
"The river's a good mile from the place where the fight was,"
he said, straddling his compasses over the Ordnance Survey map.
"and there's no sort of road they could have taken him along, but a tip like this is always worth trying. I remember in the Land League time how a man came one Saturday night to my window and told me there were holes drilled in the chapel door to shoot a boycotted man through while he was at mass. The holes were there right enough, and you may be quite sure the chap found excellent reasons for having family prayers at home next day."
I had sessions to attend on the extreme outskirts of my district, and could not wait, as Murray suggested, to see the thing out. I did not get home till the following day, and when I arrived I found a letter from Murray awaiting me.
"Your pal was right. We found Foley's body in the river, knocking about against the posts of the weir. The head was wrapped in his own green jersey and had been smashed in by a stone. We suspect a fellow named Bat Callaghan who has bolted, but there were a lot of them in it. Possibly it was Callaghan himself who gave you the tip. You can never tell how superstition is going to take them next. The inquest will be held tomorrow."
The coroner's jury took a cautious view of the course of the catastrophe, and brought in a verdict of death by misadventure, and I presently found it to be my duty to call a magisterial inquiry to further investigate the matter. A few days before this was to take place, I was engaged in the delicate task of displaying to my landlord, Mr. Flurry Knox, the defects of the pantry sink, when Mrs. Cadogan advanced upon us with the information that the widow Callaghan from Clowin would be thankful to speak to me, and had brought me a present of a fine young goose. "Is she coming over here looking for Bat?" said Flurry, withdrawing his arm and the longest kitchen ladle from the pipe that he had been probing. "She knows you're handy at hiding your friends, Mary. Perhaps it's that's stopping the drain." Mrs. Cadogan turned her large red face upon her late employer. "God knows I wish yourself were stuck in it, Master Flurry, the way you'd hear Peter cursing the full of the house when he's striving to wash those things in that unnatural little trough." "Are you sure it's Peter does all the cursing?" retorted Flurry. "I hear Father Scanlon has it in for you this long time for not going to confession." "And how can I walk 2 miles to the chapel with God's burden on my feet?" demanded Mrs. Cadogan in purple indignation. "The Blessed Virgin and Dr. Hickey knows well the hardship I get from them. If it wasn't for a pair of the Major's boots he gave me, I'd be hard set to trouble the house itself." The contest might have been continued indefinitely, had I not struck up the swords with a request that Mrs. Callaghan might be sent round to the hall door. There we found a tall, grey-haired countrywoman waiting for us at the foot of the steps, in the hooded blue cloak that is peculiar to the south of Ireland. From the fact that she clutched a pocket handkerchief in her right hand, I augured a stormy interview; but nothing could have been more self-restrained and even imposing than the reverence with which she greeted Flurry and me. "Good morning to your honours," she began, with a dignified and extremely imminent snuffle. "I ask your pardon for troubling you, Major Yates, but I haven't a one in the country to give me advice, and I have no confidence only in your honours' experiments." "Experience, she means," prompted Flurry. "Didn't you get advice enough out of Mr. Murray yesterday?" he went on aloud. "I heard he was at Clowin to see you." "And if he was itself, it's little advantage any one would get out of that little whipper-snapper of a snapdragon," responded Mrs. Callaghan tartly. "He was with me for a half hour, giving me every big rock of English till I had a reel in my head. I declare to you, Mr. Flurry, after he'd gone out of the house, you wouldn't throw 3 farthings for me." The pocket handkerchief was here utilised, After which, with a heavy groan,